Hello everyone, it's Nick. Hope you guys are doing well. You may or may not have seen my video reacting to Dennis Schröder signing the one-year contract with the Celtics worth $5.9 million. If you haven't seen that, I'll leave a card up. I'll also leave that in the end screen if you want to check that out. Shortly after I uploaded that video, Victor Oladipo signed a veteran minimum to stay with the Miami Heat, who he was traded to in March. First, he turned down the Pacers' offer of $25 million per year and a total of $113 million over the next 4 years, which was the most the Pacers were allowed to offer him. After he was traded to the Houston Rockets as a part of the James Harden trade to the Brooklyn Nets, the Rockets offered him a 2-year deal worth $45.2 million, and he turned that down too. And here we are now. He had to settle for the veterans minimum. To be fair to Oladipo though, he was actually showing flashes of his old self during the season in both Indiana and Houston before he had a season-ending injury in May after just 4 games. Sometimes betting on yourself by declining a big offer or opting out of your current contract to get an even bigger contract does work. Just ask Alex Rodriguez, since it happened to him in 2007, going from a $252 million contract that he opted out of after the 2007 season to a $275 million contract to stay with the Yankees for the next 10 years. Well, really 9 because he retired before the final year of his contract, but he still got paid in 2017 while he was retired. Or there's also Anthony Davis last year when he was offered $146 million. He declined that and signed a $190 million deal to stay with the Lakers after winning a championship. There's also Jimmy Butler re-signing with the Bulls on a 5-year deal worth $95 million back in 2015 after he turned down a 4-year $44 million extension before the 2014-15 season. And just recently, he signed a 3-year deal over $146 million for an average annual salary of almost $49 million per year. That'll begin in the 2023-24 season, which will be after his current contract of a little over $140 million expires. But betting on yourself doesn't always work, as we just saw with Dennis Schröder and Victor Oladipo. So today I will be talking about 13 athletes who should have taken the money they were offered. And I am aware Heat Check made a video like this, but my list will have more than just basketball players. Most of these guys happen to do alright later in their lives, but I'm sure if they got to make their decision over again, they would have just taken the money. There is, however, one guy on this list that really did end up in a crisis. I'll get to him later on in the video, so if you like what you're seeing, please remember to drop a like. It really helps out, and it only takes 1 second. If you're new here, I'd really appreciate it if you can consider subscribing for more sports content like this and hitting the notification bell. So let's get on with the content. I will start off with John Amaechi, the guy you may know as the first former NBA player to publicly come out as gay. In the early 2000s, he was the starting center for the Orlando Magic, and he managed to put up 10.5 points per game in the 99-2000 season, but only shot 43.7% from the field and a true shooting percentage of 50.5%, which is pretty terrible for a big man to say the least. After that season, the Lakers offered him a 6-year, $17 million contract, which he declined. Unlike the other guys I'll mention later on in this video, Amaechi actually knew what he was doing. He knew that the Magic needed him more than the Lakers did, because the Lakers obviously had Shaq at the time, so there was no way Amaechi would be starting for them, but he was already starting for the Magic at the time. And he also later went on to say, when asked about this, that the Magic gave him a chance when no one else did, so hey, I respect the loyalty, but to turn down $17 million and settle for $600,000 a year, I don't think I'd care who needs me more if I'm a role player. I'll take the money, especially if that's coming with multiple championships. The $17 million for 6 years is only a little under $3 million a year, in case you can't do the math. That wasn't even a whole lot back then, but still a lot better than $600,000. Amaechi was unfortunately never able to elevate his play from the 1999-2000 season and never ended up getting a pay raise. At least he did start 36 games for the Magic in 2001. He obviously only would have started for the Lakers when Shaq was out with an injury, so his reasoning for not taking the money and how the Magic needed him more, yeah, that does make sense. And Amaechi did play 2 more seasons in the NBA. While he was right that the Magic needed him more than the Lakers did, he still missed out on money and championships, so it's definitely safe to say that he should have taken what the Lakers offered. But with that said, he does seem to be doing fine nowadays. He owns a business now. He went back to school to get a PhD in psychology. Even though he lost out on an opportunity to make millions and be part of a dynasty, even if it was being on the bench most of the time, and instead ended up on teams that didn't make it past the first round, at least he didn't end up in a crisis, so that's at least good for him that he's doing okay with his life now. But moving on, like I said, this is not just basketball players, and I'll get on with my first baseball player. That would be Neil Walker. The Mets offered him a 3-year extension in the spring training of 2017 for about $42 million, and Neil Walker and his camp initially declined, but then decided to re-engage with the Mets, only to have the Mets decline. I think he should have accepted it the first time. He had a pretty good year in 2016, but in 2017, he wasn't bad, but his average went down, but his on-base percentage went up. His WRC plus also went down though. After that season, there was no way he couldn't regret not taking what the Mets offered him, and he ended up signing a 1-year, $4 million deal with the Yankees to be a backup. He did play a couple more seasons on back-to-back 1-year contract before retiring earlier this year. And he did miss out on that big contract, but actually when he retired, he said that he has no regrets. Yes, it's true, money isn't everything, but I think I would regret missing out on the kind of money that he missed out on. And he did live out his dream of playing in the big league, something that most of us could only wish we ever got to do. So there's also that positive way of looking at things. And same with the other athletes that I'm going to mention later on. And he is now joining the Pirates broadcast team, so hey, good for him. But dude, you really did play yourself by not taking the money that the Mets offered you. Next, we have Bonzi Wells. Some of you remember him as part of the Portland Trailblazers team that we knew as the Jailblazers. He had his best statistical seasons in Portland, but then he got traded to Memphis and then to the Sacramento Kings. And the 1 year he spent in Sacramento, he averaged 13 points per game during the regular season, and he was able to up that to 23 per game in the playoffs, although the Kings did end up losing that series, and that happened to still be to this day the last time the Kings ever made the playoffs. This got the Kings to offer him a 5-year, $38 million contract to stay with the team. He declined that in hopes of getting offered more money in free agency. He ended up firing his agent, but that only hurt himself. Instead of getting what he wanted, he had to settle for just $2 million to go to the Houston Rockets, where he feuded with Jeff Van Gundy, and for those of you who didn't know, he was coaching the Houston Rockets at the time. The following season, Bonzi Wells was traded to the New Orleans Hornets, who we know as the Pelicans now. That would turn out to be the last year of his career, despite only being 31 years old. He could have been under contract for 3 more years after that had he accepted the deal from the Kings. Instead, he ended up playing in China, and like other NBA players, he dominated, but then had his contract terminated after he failed to return to the team after the Chinese New Year break. After that, he joined a team in Puerto Rico, and that was it for his professional basketball career. He did get to appear in the Big 3 basketball league formed by Ice Cube in recent years, and he got to co-captain the team called Tri-State with Jermaine O'Neal. He seems to be doing okay now. I didn't get to find out too much about him, but again, you should have taken the money. Next, we have our first NFL player, Terrelle Pryor, a guy that failed as a quarterback and ended up switching to wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns in 2016, and was way better than people expected. He had over 1,000 yards that season, but was on a god-awful team. The Browns offered him a 4-year, $32 million deal after the season, with $17 million of that guaranteed. But Terrelle Pryor bet on himself and ended up signing a 1-year, $8 million prove-it deal with the Washington football team, who were still the Redskins at the time. And Pryor was terrible for them, as he only had 240 receiving yards that year, only started 2 games due to injuries, and just not playing well. His catch rate actually didn't take a huge hit though, nor did his yards per catch, so I guess he just wasn't able to get open a lot. But if anyone wants to fill me in more on that, yeah, you can let me know. But he just wasn't able to produce like he was able to for one season in Cleveland, and after that he signed with the Jets for 1 year, $4.5 million with $2 million guaranteed, and he caught 14 passes for 235 yards before the Jets cut him while he was dealing with a groin injury. Then the Buffalo Bills picked him up and he only played 2 games for them. After that, he only ended up on the Jaguars practice squad. Then they placed him on injured reserve and he was released. He's still only 32 years old. He should have still been able to play and still could have been under contract until last year, but the 2017 season just happened to be the beginning of the end for him, and he's just another guy that should have taken the money. Now we're on to Tim Lincecum. You remember the freak, right? The ace of the San Francisco Giants in the late 2000s, early 2010s. He was offered $100 million for 5 years in 2011. Instead, Lincecum signed a 2-year, $40.5 million deal in January of 2012, so his AAV was roughly the same, but on a shorter deal. And for how great he was in his prime, it is understandable that Lincecum would want more money, but he ended up having to settle for a shorter contract because he rejected the longer one. And from 2008 to 11, he had an ERA of 2.81. The whip wasn't great though at 1.173, but he did have a ridiculous K rate and struck out over 200 batters in all 4 of those seasons. He also had a 3.21 ERA in the Giants championship run in 2010. He even pitched a complete game shutout in Game 1 of the NLDS that year. In Game 5 of the 2010 World Series, which was the clinching game for the Giants, Tim Lincecum pitched 8 innings, only gave up 1 earned run, and struck out 10. However, 2011 would be the last year we'd see him dominate. In 2012 and 13, he was still striking out players, but became a lot more prone to giving up the long ball, and his ERA skyrocketed from 2.74 in 2011 to 5.18 in 2012. It was mostly the first half of 2012 where Lincecum just looked completely lost on the mound, but even the second half, while not the ace that he used to be, he did actually show some signs of getting closer to that. So it's safe to say that the Giants dodged a bullet when Lincecum declined their offer. But even though Lincecum had a very sudden, steep decline, he still got to be part of 2 more Giants championship runs. But in the 2012 playoff run, he ended up being used out of the bullpen, and he did very well out of the bullpen. It was the one game that he started that did not go so well. After that season, for him statistically, things did not get better, even though he did try to improve his conditioning in that offseason. Although, Lincecum actually didn't start the 2013 season that badly. He had a 3.64 ERA in the first month of the season. Pretty high whip though, but then his season took a downhill turn in May as he posted a 6.37 ERA and a 1.585 whip. He did do better in June and threw a no-hitter in July, had a decent August, but overall just wasn't the same pitcher anymore. After that season, the Giants did pay him decent money, 2 years, $35 million, which is an AAV of $17.5 million, but of course he was definitely better off taking the extension that he was initially offered, but it was also a win for the Giants as he was just not the same pitcher anymore. Lincecum did throw a no-hitter the following season too, but once again, statistically, he was even worse in 2014 and even fell to 4th in the rotation. He did have some vintage performances though, like on May 12th, he struck out 11 batters in 7 2/3 innings while only giving up 1 run against the Braves, and had a no-hitter going for 5 innings against the Cubs on May 28th. And he did have an ERA of 2.86 for the month of May, but also an embarrassingly high whip. Despite these great outings and his no-hitter in June, his season was tumultuous enough that he was the only player on the 25-man roster to not even be used in the NLDS or CS. The Giants did once again win the World Series, which made it 3 in 5 years, so At least that for Lincecum and for the team. But just for Lincecum, yeah, it became pretty clear that he was just no longer able to do what he used to do. In June of 2015, Lincecum played for the Giants for the last time ever. He got hit in the elbow on a line drive by DJ Amaechi, which he eventually needed surgery for. For what should have been the last year of Lincecum's contract, had he taken the extension, he ended up signing a $2.5 million deal with the Angels and started out in the minors to rehab, and he had a very solid debut for the Angels, giving up just 1 run in 6 innings. Is he about to have a rebirth? Nope. He had the worst year of his career with an ERA of 9.16. That was it for Tim Lincecum, as he never made another pitch in the major leagues. Nowadays, Lincecum lives in Seattle according to what I see on Google, although he's not formally retired yet. But of course, it would be a miracle if he ever pitches another game in the big leagues. Moving on to the next guy, Vladimir Radmanovic. He was a sharpshooter coming off the bench for the Seattle Supersonics during the days of the OG Splash Brothers, Ray Allen and Rashard Lewis. Just a few years before the team drafted Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook and then relocated to Oklahoma City and became the Thunder. After Radmanovic averaged 11.8 points per game off the bench for the Sonics in 2005, the Sonics offered him a 6-year $42 million deal and declined that, and instead, he ended up signing a 1-year deal. After Radmanovic voiced his frustration for not starting, the Sonics traded him to the Clippers, and that allowed him to increase his production, and then after that, he signed with the Lakers on a 5-year $30 million deal. Something that the Clippers were also offering, but the icebreaker was the fact that Radmanovic was guaranteed to start for the Lakers. Radmanovic still won on the court with the Lakers while losing financially, right? Nope. He was traded to the then Charlotte Bobcats, now the Hornets, for Shannon Brown and Adam Morrison for salary dump purposes mid-season, as the Lakers were on their way to winning the 2009 championship, their 15th in franchise history and their first since 2002. So in the end, it just happened to be a lose-lose situation for Vladimir Radmanovic. Okay, at least he can say he had the opportunity to play in the finals in 2008, but just never won it, and he lost out on $10 million, so that sucks. Next, we have Joe Smith, the former number 1 overall pick in 1995. While he wasn't a bad player, he did not live up to the hype of a number 1 overall pick by any means at all. He did show some promise, though, in his first 2.5 seasons in the NBA with the Golden State Warriors, and the Warriors believed that he could be the next franchise cornerstone and offered him an $80 million extension, but he chose to bet on himself, and he declined it. Afterwards, he was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers. From that point on, he was just a decent role player for much of his career, which is not what you want out of a number 1 overall pick, right? By the time Joe Smith was a free agent for the first time, he ended up signing a $1.75 million deal with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And he and the Timberwolves ended up doing some highly illegal stuff under the table. They would sign him to 3 consecutive cheap 1-year deals to have more cap space so that they could eventually sign him to a 3-year $86 million deal once the Timberwolves had their bird rights. In other words, they'd be able to go over the salary cap to keep him. If only the Timberwolves didn't get caught though. He would have been just fine without the extension that he declined from the Warriors in the earlier part of his career. Not only did Joe Smith not get his $86 million contract, the Timberwolves lost out on 5 first-round picks. They were a playoff team, so they weren't lottery picks anyways, but they still lost out on guys that could have given Kevin Garnett much needed help during the prime of his career in Minnesota. So it was a lose-lose situation for both sides, and I'm flabbergasted at the Timberwolves front office for being that dysfunctional to even try something like this with a guy who they knew was only a role player and wasn't about to live up to the hype of a number 1 overall pick at that point in his career. Joe Smith would end up spending the rest of his career as a journeyman. After his career, not only did he lose out on a lot of money from the Warriors by declining their offer, and also not get the $86 million that he thought he was gonna get from the Timberwolves doing highly illegal stuff, he ended up losing $61 million. At one point, only had $3,000 in his bank account, but thankfully Alex Rodriguez came to the rescue to help him out financially and got him to run some basketball camps. So now Joe Smith is doing a lot better, much thanks to Alex Rodriguez. So the next guy up, we have Ian Desmond. And he was a guy who was a key part of the Nationals' 2012 and 14 playoff teams and was one of baseball's better power hitting shortstops. Became a pretty good defensive shortstop in 2013. This made the Nationals offer him a 7-year, $107 million deal before the 2015 season, but Desmond declined in hopes for more money. While the Nationals dodged a bullet, Ian Desmond played himself, and he fell off a cliff in 2015, hitting just .233 with a .290 on base percentage, and he had a WRC plus of just 83. That got him a 1-year deal with the Texas Rangers. Although he did have a resurgence with the Texas Rangers, hitting .285 with a .324 on base percentage, .446 slugging percentage, and a WRC plus of 103. That bounce back season got him a 5-year, $70 million deal with the Colorado Rockies, so at least this didn't work out terribly for him. He was able to make back some of the money that he lost out on. But the 2 seasons that he's played for the Rockies, he has not been good. He opted out of both last season and this year, so this was definitely a losing situation for the Rockies and a winning situation for the Nationals. More of a losing situation for Ian Desmond, but not the worst losing situation by any means out of the guys that are on this list. Now we have one more football player, and that is quarterback Kelly Stauffer. How many of you have heard that name before? I could be wrong, but I have a feeling not a whole lot of people, since most of my audience isn't older than 34. But if you're aware of him, feel free to tell me. I mean, if you're aware of him, then nice. But when we think of the biggest NFL draft busts, the notorious ones that come to mind are obviously Ryan Leaf and Jamarcus Russell, right? Or there are also guys like Joey Harrington, David Carr, Tim Couch, Mark Sanchez. Well, Kelly Stauffer was the 6th overall pick by the then St. Louis Cardinals in the 1987 NFL Draft. He refused to sign and reportedly turned down a 4-year contract that would have paid him $1.78 million plus incentives, and he would have been the highest paid rookie in franchise history. Instead, he sat out the entire season before being traded to the Seahawks, where he signed a 4-year, $3.1 million deal, including a $1 million bonus. So in the short term, he didn't really take a financial hit, but by holding out and then getting traded, this probably did hurt his development and his long-term value. He only started 16 games in 4 years with the Seahawks and threw just 7 touchdown passes while throwing 19 interceptions, and never had a QB rating over 69.2. He did end up on the Dolphins and Panthers practice squads later on, but never actually made their official rosters. Fortunately for him, he actually is doing pretty good today. After his NFL career, he got a degree in biology from Colorado State University, and today he's a color analyst for college football games on ESPN and ABC. And remember, in case any aspiring pro athletes are watching this, you can still succeed at something else even if your professional sports career does not pan out. Now we're on to Juan Gonzalez, a 3-time MLB All-Star, 2-time American League MVP, a 6-time Silver Slugger winner, who led the league in home runs twice, before the Texas Rangers traded Juan Gonzalez to the Detroit Tigers before the 2000 season started. With 1 year left on his contract, Juan Gonzalez seemed well on his way to the Hall of Fame, with most of his accolades I just mentioned happening in the 10 years he had just spent with the Texas Rangers. After the trade, the Tigers offered Juan Gonzalez what would have been the richest contract in the history of baseball at the time, an 8-year deal worth $140 million. This would have kept him on the team until 2009, or at least under contract, but he declined after seeing that Comerica Park, where the Tigers were about to have their inaugural season at, had pitcher-friendly conditions. This would turn out to be a huge mistake for Juan Gonzalez, and the Tigers dodged a bullet, and they were in a long rebuilding phase at the time. Juan Gonzalez had a pretty good season statistically. in 2001, but he only played 115 games out of 162. He hit .289 with an OPS of .842 and 22 home runs and 67 RBIs, which would be 31 home runs and 94 RBIs in 162 games, but that was still a step back from what he was doing in previous years. The following offseason, while Alex Rodriguez signed a mega deal with the Texas Rangers, Manny Ramirez signed a mega deal with the Boston Red Sox, and Mike Hampton signed a mega deal with the Colorado Rockies. And Mike Hampton's contract ended up being one of the worst contracts ever. Juan Gonzalez had to settle for a one-year, $10 million deal with the Cleveland Indians. Juan Gonzalez did see a resurgence though. He hit 35 home runs and 140 RBIs while hitting .325 with a .370 on base percentage and .590 slugging percentage, giving him an OPS of .960. He also hit .348 in the playoffs with 2 home runs and 5 RBIs, but unfortunately the Indians lost to a then rookie Ichiro and the Seattle Mariners that won 116 games that year. Yeah, as you can see, he did make the last out, but it's still pretty hard to blame him when he puts up the numbers that he did in that series, right? He ended up going back to the Texas Rangers the following year, but on just a 2-year, $24 million contract. From that point on, Juan Gonzalez was never able to stay healthy, not even playing more than 82 games in the remaining 4 years of his career. It's definitely safe to say Juan Gonzalez should have taken the money that would have kept him under contract until 2009, although his career ended in 2005 after just 1 game that year. Even though I would imagine deep down inside, he would much rather take the money if he could do it over again. He did say in 2007 that his personal life was now in order. I'd rather have health and family, my relationship with God more than money, he said. How many people who can buy whatever they want have committed suicide? God is first, then your kids, your family, good health, and hey, take what you want about religion. If you believe in God, hey, you can believe in God. If you're an atheist, that's fine too. But however you feel about that, one thing we can all agree on is that money isn't everything. And more recently, Juan Gonzalez has found success managing the Puerto Rican national baseball team. Now we're on to Nomar Garciaparra, the former star shortstop of the Boston Red Sox in the late 90s and early 2000s. Some might know him because he's married to Mia Hamm, an American soccer icon. As someone who knows nothing about soccer, even I know who she is. Now, as a diehard New York Yankees fan, I will admit, prime Nomar was better than Jeter. Just look at the numbers. The thing was, Derek Jeter won those rings because he was playing on a better team, and he's more decorated also because he was much more durable. Nomar put up some great postseason numbers in his prime too. One thing that Derek Jeter did have over Nomar is Jeter was a more patient hitter. Nomar only had a walk rate of 10% or higher once in his career. But in terms of hitting the ball, Nomar was definitely better. Nomar even once hit .372, and advanced stats people, he had a WRC plus of 154 that year. He hit .372. So after Derek Jeter signed a 10-year, $189 million extension with the Yankees, and Alex Rodriguez signed his then record-breaking 10-year, $252 million deal with the Texas Rangers, Nomar wanted a big payday of his own, and I definitely do not blame him because at the time he was definitely worthy of it. Before the 2002 season, the Red Sox changed ownership, and Nomar's agent Arntellum began contract extension talks with the Red Sox. Although the parties agreed on a 4-year, $60 million deal, the only problem was Nomar requested an $8 million signing bonus, which the Red Sox did not give him. Although Nomar was limited to just 21 games due to a wrist injury in 2001, he played 156 games the following year and was still playing at a very high level, hitting .310 and leading the league in doubles with 56 while also hitting 24 home runs and 120 RBIs. In 2003, Nomar once again hit over 300, this time with 28 home runs and 105 RBIs. He also stole 19 bases in 2003, the most he's ever stolen since 1997 when he stole 22 bases. It does make sense that Nomar would bet on himself because he was that good at the time. But here's where Nomar gets screwed. After the 2003 season, which the Red Sox were 1 game away from reaching the World Series for the first time since 1986. Hey, Aaron Boone, you were the man that night, but don't even get me started with how much he nauseates me as a manager. Yeah, just a side tangent. Arntellum suggested to the Red Sox that they should trade him if they're not going to extend him. and the Red Sox were actually about to trade him to the White Sox as they were preparing to ship Manny Ramirez to the Texas Rangers for A-Rod. But the A-Rod deal fell through and Nomar stayed in Boston. But even though Nomar stayed in Boston, it became clear that it was only a matter of when he got traded, not a matter of if. Nomar started the 2004 season with an Achilles injury that kept him out until June. If the 2001 season wasn't a sign for things to come for Nomar in the future in regards to his health, 2004 had to be. When Nomar came back though, he did hit 321 with a 367 on base percentage and a 500 slugging percentage for the Red Sox, although his defense became pretty abysmal. Despite Nomar still hitting phenomenally for the Red Sox in 2004, the Red Sox dealt Nomar to the Cubs at the deadline. And now I have to bring back some of the worst memories of my life. No, don't make me talk about what happened in the 2004 ALCS. Alright, fine, I'll talk about it. The Yankees blew a 3-0 lead, and after that the Red Sox won their first World Series since 1918 without Nomar and broke the curse of the Bambino. Okay, done talking about that. I don't want to talk about that anymore, please. I would like to just forget that ever happened, okay? Now, Nomar not only lost out on a lot of money, but also a chance to win a World Series with the team that groomed him and made him into the beloved star that he was in Boston. Nomar ended up re-signing with the Cubs for just 1 year and $8 million. In 2005, he was limited to just 62 games and his production declined, and he ended up signing a 1-year, $6 million deal with his hometown LA Dodgers, and that contract had $2.5 million in performance bonuses. He did play 122 games, the most he's played since 2003, but he missed 40 games. Despite that, he did have a stellar season with the Dodgers and made the All-Star game and won Comeback Player of the Year. He was also moved from shortstop to first base that year and actually played very well at first base. However, the Dodgers were swept by the Mets in the NLDS and Nomar hit just .222 that series. Nomar did re-sign with the Dodgers for 2 more years, but still nothing close to what the Red Sox were willing to extend him for. Nomar made $18.5 million over the next 2 seasons, but he was derailed by injuries and he didn't have the pop in his bat anymore that he once had. That got him on a 1-year deal with the Oakland A's where he would spend the final year of his career. So while it's safe to say Nomar should have taken the money, at the time I do think it was understandable why he wanted more because he really was that good. Had he been healthy, there's no question Nomar Garciaparra would have a plaque in Cooperstown. Even as much as I despise the Boston Red Sox, I do find it really sad that Nomar was robbed of a Hall of Fame career and how unlikely it'd be for him to even be mentioned in this video had he just stayed healthy. Because if he were healthy, he probably would have gotten the extension that he wanted. However, Nomar's next life hasn't been so bad as he took a position at ESPN for Baseball Tonight and was chosen to broadcast some Wednesday night baseball games. He also got to be one of the lead analysts for the College World Series. In 2013, he got to join the Dodgers broadcast team. He also got inducted to the Red Sox Hall of Fame and became a minority investor for the Los Angeles FC soccer team in 2014. Alright, yeah, I know this video is getting long, but if you're still here, thank you so much. Now we're on to Nerlens Noel, the former number 6 overall pick who was highly touted his freshman year at Kentucky and was expected to be a lottery pick despite tearing his ACL during his 1 season at Kentucky. And it's hard to believe the Sixers process, something that I think we can say the Sixers botched at this point, actually started with Nerlens Noel and Michael Carter-Williams. Nerlens Noel never lived up to his hype in Philly. It didn't help though that at the time the Sixers just wanted to draft centers, but he did show plenty of promise on the defensive end, and even in college, he wasn't much of a scorer, he was a rim protector. Nerlens Noel ended up being traded to the Dallas Mavericks at the 2017 trade deadline, and here is where his agent screwed him. The Mavericks offered him a 4-year, $70 million offer. After the season, his agent declined. But remember all the multi-year deals going on at the time that made us think, what? How is this guy making that much? Kelly Olynyk signing with the Heat on a 4-year, $50 million deal. Tim Hardaway Jr. going back to the Knicks on a 4-year, $71 million deal. Or the Wizards matching the Nets offer to Otto Porter Jr. of 4 years, $106.5 million. Just to name a few. kind of hard to blame Nerlens Noel's agent for demanding much more when other guys we all knew were just role players were getting those kinds of deals, I guess, but it backfired and Nerlens Noel ended up re-signing for just 1 year, $4 million. Noel is still a defensive force now in New York, so at least, even though he did not live up to his hype and lost out on tens of millions of dollars, he's still in the league, and as long as he's healthy, he should be in the league for plenty more years to come. But I'm sure that he would have liked to take the Mavericks offer if he got to do it all over again. Or tell his agent to take the offer. Lastly, the guy in the thumbnail. This is a story that I'm sure plenty of you watching this have heard, or maybe not, I don't know, but if you haven't heard the story, I am more than glad to tell you about it. This is where things actually ended up in a crisis. Latrell Sprewell, you may remember him as the guy who choked his coach in a practice, which got him suspended for 68 games without pay, and also got the remainder of his contract with the Warriors, which included $23.7 million over the next 3 years, voided back in 1998. But he was actually a very good player for the Golden State Warriors and the New York Knicks. He was a 4-time All-Star and played an integral role in the 1999 New York Knicks Cinderella run to the finals as the 8th seed. He spent his final 2 years in Minnesota, and his first year there, he helped them earn the top record in the Western Conference and a trip to the Western Conference Finals. This was Kevin Garnett's MVP season. In October of 2004, the Timberwolves offered Sprewell a 3-year, $21 million extension, which was less than what he was getting paid at the time. Sprewell felt insulted, and as you saw in the thumbnail, he told the team, "I have a family to feed," and he rejected the offer. He ended up having the worst season of his career, averaging just 12.8 points per game while playing a career-low 30 minutes per game. After that, he never saw NBA action again. Teams like the Denver Nuggets, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Houston Rockets did express interest in signing Sprewell the following offseason, but none of them did sign him. A month into the 2005-06 season, Sprewell's agent Bob Gist, I'm sorry if I botched his name. I don't know if it's Gist or Gist. I apologize for not knowing his name, but he said that Sprewell would rather retire than play for a minimum contract, and also said that he doesn't need the money that badly to go from being offered $7 million a year to take just $1 million. That sure does not look good on his resume. The worst is yet to come for Latrell Sprewell. The Spurs and Mavericks offered Sprewell contracts as they were competing for a championship in 2006, but Sprewell didn't even respond to them, and that was it for Latrell Sprewell's NBA career. Here is where Latrell Sprewell ends up in a crisis. In his post-playing days, he has had plenty of financial problems. You had a family to feed, yet you passed up $21 million to go bankrupt, have your yacht repossessed, a couple of your houses going into foreclosure status, and Sprewell even became Wisconsin's #1 delinquent taxpayer, and he even had an ex-girlfriend sue him for $200 million. As of today, it is reported that he lives in a rental home in Milwaukee, although he's been seen at plenty of Knicks games and events. At least he's not homeless, but it's how he went from making $100 million during his NBA career that was very much a successful one to saying he has a family to feed when offered $21 million only to never play another NBA game and go broke after his career ended. That's where he just really messed up badly. Hopefully Sprewell isn't the only one to learn from his mistakes though. Hopefully other people can learn from it too. There you have it, 13 athletes who financially mismanaged their careers, some worse than others. If I missed anyone, please let me know in the comments. Also, feel free to share any memories you have of the athletes I talked about here. Please remember to consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell. Yeah, my throat is starting to hurt from talk this long. But if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, because I know this was a very long video. I did not think it would be this long, but here we are now. So yeah, once again, thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Peace.